Happy New Year 2025 celebration and welcome to episode 1.3 Book 2 Chapter 2. Responsible Institutions, Environment and Natural Resources Code, King Dong of Cambodia. Article 29. Cooperation with relevant ministries or institutions. 1. When necessary, the ministry responsible for environment and natural resources shall cooperate and coordinate with relevant ministries/institutions and subnational administration in the execution of its roles and duties. 2. The ministry responsible for environment and natural resources may enter into agreements on the production and sharing of data with competent ministries/institutions and other legal entities to produce, use, and share data and information on biodiversity and sustainable use of ecosystem services. Article 30. Strategic plans. In cooperation with the ministry responsible for environment and natural resources, relevant ministries/institutions shall mainstream and integrate biodiversity conservation, sustainable use of ecosystem services, fair and equitable benefit sharing from the utilization of generic resources into their strategic plans. They shall issue and implement guidelines and other necessary mechanisms to ensure sustainability of biodiversity resources and ecosystem services. Article 31. Implementation of international instruments concerning biodiversity. The ministry responsible for environment and natural resources shall cooperate with relevant ministries/institutions and subnational administration to develop draft policies, strategic plans, action plans, legal instruments, and other programs to implement the UN Convention on Biodiversity, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, the Nagoya Protocol on Access to Generic Resources, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilization, ABS, and other international instruments concerning biodiversity and ecosystem services, to which the Kingdom of Cambodia is a state party. Section 3. Biosafety. Chapter 1. General Provisions. Article 32. Purpose. This section aims to ensure effectiveness of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity resources with an emphasis on risks of the utilization and release of living modified organisms into the environment and adverse effects on human health through the implementation of the precautionary principle on biosafety, awareness raising of modern biotechnology, and prevention of adverse impacts on conservation of biodiversity and natural resources. Article 33. Scope. 1. This section shall apply to all activities or operations related to living modified organisms, including importation, exportation, storage, contained use, introduction into the environment, direct use as food or animal feed, or for processing in various forms. 2. Activities or operations stipulated in paragraph 1 above exclude using living modified organisms as medicine. Chapter 2. Responsible Institutions. Article 34. Responsible Institutions. The ministry responsible for environment and natural resources shall have authority to control all activities and/or operations concerning living modified organisms. Article 35. Roles and duties of the ministry responsible for environment and natural resources. The ministry responsible for environment and natural resources is the national focal point, responsible for the management of biosafety, with the following roles and duties. A. Develop draft policies, strategic plans, activity plans, technical guidelines, and legal instruments for biodiversity management. B. Review and make decisions on living modified organism importation and exportation proposals. C. Act as a national focal point to conduct initial communication between the Royal Government of Cambodia and the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. D. Timely notification to other countries, international organizations, and relevant biodiversity distribution centers in case of any incident occurring in Cambodia due to unintentional cross-border movement of living modified organisms. E. Timely notification and dissemination of information via coordination mechanisms and sharing information on biosafety. Article 36. Cooperation with relevant ministries and institutions. in collaboration with competent ministries/institutions and subnational administration. The ministry responsible for environment and natural resources shall A. Control all activities and/or operations related to biosafety. B. Review and provide technical comments on the application of risk assessment of activities and/or operations related to living modified organisms. Article 37. Pre-risk assessment. 1. The ministry responsible for environment and natural resources shall ensure appropriate risk assessments of all activities and/or operations related to living modified organisms as stated in this code. 2. Applicants shall have the obligation to conduct risk assessments of activities and/or operations related to their living modified organisms. All costs of implementing this obligation are the applicant's sole responsibility. 3. The ministry responsible for environment and natural resources shall review and decide on the proposals after receiving related documents. Chapter 3. Living modified organisms. Part 1. Import and export of living modified organism. Article 38. Procedure before importation of living modified organism. 1. Persons intending to import living modified organisms into Cambodia shall notify in writing and receive prior approval from the ministry responsible for environment and natural resources before seeking authorization from competent ministries/institutions and subnational administration. 2. Requirements for notification and procedures for application for first importation. Authorization of living modified organism shall be determined in a PROCA's official proclamation of the minister responsible for the environment and natural resources after consultations with competent ministries/institutions and subnational administration. Article 39. Importation for contained uses. The first importation authorization of living modified organisms into Cambodia for contained use shall have a risk assessment conducted and receive prior approval from the ministry responsible for environment and natural resources after consultations with competent ministries/institutions and subnational administration. Article 40. Importation for intentional introduction into the environment. The importation of living modified organisms into Cambodia for intentional introduction into the environment shall have a risk assessment conducted and receive prior approval from the ministry responsible for environment and natural resources after consultations with competent ministries/institutions and subnational administration before applying for importation authorization from the competent ministries/institutions. Article 41. Importation for direct use as food, animal feed, or for processing. 1. The first importation of living modified organisms into Cambodia for direct use as food, animal feeds, or for processing shall have a risk assessment conducted and receive prior approval from the ministry responsible for environment and natural resources before applying for importation authorization from the competent ministries/institutions. Thank you for listening. I hope everyone enjoy New Year 2025. Bring you good luck.